Today, what we're going to talk about is one of the most in-demand topic has been requested. Let's talk about triangle of exposure. Hey, this is Vinoya and welcome to another 3 Tips Wednesday. On today's episode, we are going to discover and understand why this is called the triangle of exposure. First, shutter. Shutter is responsible for capturing motions. A faster shutter can capture fast motion. This is my preference only. My standard shutter speed whenever I shoot is 1/125. So because of these settings, may iwasan natin ng any motion blur or handshakes, even yung mga konting blur lang with your subject. So that's why for me, this is my personal preference or this is my shutter settings for capturing faster motions. If you're shooting more like sports type or sports settings, you can go beyond 1/500 or 1/1000. It depends kung ano man yung kinukuhanan mo. But for me, the standard is 1/125. Then, a slow shutter can create a motion blur. You will use these settings if you want to show any motions in your still photographs. So take note, the faster the shutter, the darker the images. Because mas konti ang pumapasok na light sa loob ng camera mo. So imagine if you're blinking faster, mas madilim ang paningin mo, mas less light ang pumapasok sa mata mo. But with the slow shutter, you can get a lighter images. Ang shutter ay nag-work like ng eyelids natin. So second, aperture. Aperture is responsible for depth of field. Aperture is measured with f-stops. Ito minsan yung binabasa namin like f2.8, f4, or f5.6, and so on. The smaller value of your aperture like f2.8 or f1.8, the wider your aperture blades can open. Using these settings, it can create more background blurs or tinatawag nating bokeh. Then, the higher value of your aperture like f4, f5.6, and so on, the smaller your aperture blades can open. So with these settings, mas less ang blur or mas more ang details. Ginagamit usually ito when you're shooting portraits or landscapes. But take note, the higher the aperture value, the darker the images can get. Dahil mas nakapikit ang aperture blades mo, mas less light ang pumapasok sa lenses. On the other side, the lower aperture, the lighter the images can get. Dahil mas maraming light naman ang pumapasok once naka-open ang iyong aperture blades. And third, ISO or yung tinatawag na International Standard Organization. So, ISO is responsible for the sensitivity of light of your camera or your sensor. So, ang paggamit nito will depend if you're shooting outdoor or indoor. The higher the ISO, the lighter the images can get. So, you can use this ISO to compensate if madilim ang settings ng shutter or ng aperture mo. On the other hand, the lower ISO, the darker your images can get. So, you can compensate these settings with your aperture and ISO if maliwanag ang setup mo. But take note, the higher the ISO, the noisier it will get. Ang noise, ito yung pag nag-zoom in ka sa photograph, ito yung parang mga grains na pwedeng makadurog ng details ng photograph mo. But the lower the ISO, so mas complete ang details ng photograph mo. So to conclude, that's why tinawag itong triangle of exposure because the shutter, the aperture, and ISO, they can compensate with each other. Let's say madilim ang shutter mo, you can adjust with your aperture and with your ISO. Or kung madilim ang aperture mo, you can adjust with your shutter and your ISO. So try to explore more with these settings and continue shooting and create more photographs. And that's my 3 tips for today. If you like this episode, give it a thumbs up and share this video. And do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and ring that bell to get notified on my next videos. Thank you for watching. This is Vinoya and see you on my next 3 Tips Wednesday. Sing song.